My name is Officer Doru Vlad, and I've worked the mountain patrol for nearly 9 years now. The station is buried deep in the folds of the Carpathians, where the roads are just barely etched into the earth like old scars. It's a quiet job most days, the kind of quiet that sits heavy on your chest like you're being watched by the trees themselves. Some of the older locals tell stories of things living in the forest that predate the villages, things with no names but plenty of teeth. But I always laughed that off until the winter of last year. That's when the calls started coming in. Strange reports from the more remote settlements. Animals found flayed and strung up in the trees like decorations. Symbols etched into frozen soil with precision like surgical carvings. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just the eerie silence that settled like fog afterward. I didn't think much of it until dispatch told me we lost contact with the village of Lunka. An isolated place nestled so far back in the mountains, even the GPS gets confused trying to find it. I volunteered to go check it out. Figured it was just a busted radio or heavy snowfall cutting them off. I packed my rifle, flashlight, chains for the tires, and a heavy coat, and set out before dawn. The road was a winding mess of ice and gravel, and the higher I climbed, the thicker the trees got, like nature itself didn't want me going further. My radio kept crackling with static that grew louder the closer I got. Not just white noise, but strange warbling sounds, like someone whispering in a language I didn't know. I tried to call back to base, but got nothing but distortion. By the time I reached the village, the sun was low behind the peaks, and the whole place was cloaked in shadow. Not a soul in sight, no movement, no smoke from chimneys, not even barking dogs. I stepped out of the vehicle and immediately felt the air shift, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I knocked on the first door I saw, the wood brittle and warped. It creaked open on its own, and the smell hit me like a punch to the gut, rot, and something sharp underneath like burning hair. Inside, I found overturned furniture, deep scratches gouged into the walls like someone tried to claw their way out. Dried blood smeared across the floor leading toward the back room. I followed it, my boots sticking to the floor in spots, flashlight jittering from my unsteady hands. The bedroom was empty, except for a crib tipped on its side and something scrawled in charcoal across the wall. I couldn't read it. The letters didn't make sense. They twisted when I looked at them too long. I stumbled out into the cold again, every breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried house after house. Same story, wreckage and silence. Every home abandoned like the people vanished mid-movement. Spoons still in bowls, coats still hanging by the doors, but not a single person in sight. It was like something swept through and plucked them from existence. I was about to call it in when I heard it, a high-pitched humming from the forest behind the village, steady and low at first like an insect, then rising in pitch until it vibrated in my teeth. I turned toward it, rifle raised, and that's when I saw the first figure, tall and thin. Too thin to be human, its limbs too long, its skin pale and sagging like wax left too close to heat. Its face, if you could call it that, was a smooth stretch of flesh with a single vertical slit where the mouth should be, and it was humming, the sound leaking from that slit like steam from a vent. It didn't move toward me, just watched, and I stood frozen, unable to lift my arms, my legs, anything. The pressure in my skull built like my brain was being squeezed by invisible hands. Then, in an instant, it vanished into the trees and the humming stopped, just like that, and I could breathe again. I stumbled to the car, locked the doors, and sat there shaking, eyes darting to every shadow. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even blink. And when the sun finally rose, I tried to radio base again. And this time, it went through. They heard the panic in my voice and told me to return immediately. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I found out what happened to the people of Lunka, because something took them. Something old and silent and watching, and I was already too deep to turn back now. I waited until the sun was fully above the ridge before stepping out again. My legs stiff from the cold, and my hands trembling. Not just from the temperature, but from something deeper, something primal that told me I shouldn't be there. I shouldn't be anywhere near this place. I checked the homes again in the daylight. But they looked no different, no clearer, only more tragic in the light. The silence was too absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the creak of trees in the wind. It was like the world itself was pausing to watch what I'd do next. I followed the blood trail from one house out into the snow, where it abruptly ended near the tree line. No body, no signs of a struggle, just a narrow imprint like something heavy had been dragged upward rather than along the ground. I stared into the woods, but the light didn't seem to reach far in. Only a few feet past the trees, it became a wall of grey, a thick presence pressing outward. I heard something again, a rustle this time, dry branches breaking under weight. But when I turned, nothing was there, just those massive trees and a wind that smelled like rot. I went back to the vehicle, grabbed my rifle and my secondary flashlight, the larger industrial one with a beam that could slice through fog. I wasn't planning to go deep into the forest. I just wanted to follow the tracks, see where they led. But the moment I crossed that tree line, I knew I'd made a mistake. The air was colder and thicker. It clung to my skin and sank into my lungs like I was breathing something old and stagnant. The light barely reached 10 feet ahead, swallowed by the dense fog curling through the underbrush like living things. I walked slowly, careful not to lose my sense of direction, marking trees with scratches from my knife every 20 paces. The forest was unnaturally still, like everything was waiting for something to happen. And then I saw the first of the totems. It was hanging from a low branch, a twisted construction of bone, rope, and dried animal skin. It spun slowly even though there was no wind, and I felt my stomach churn as I stepped around it. More followed, one every 10 or 20 meters, each more grotesque than the last. Some had human teeth embedded in the knots, others had small black stones for eyes, and all of them were humming. Not loudly, but just under the edge of hearing, like the vibration of power lines. You can't quite explain. I kept going because I didn't know what else to do. And that's when I found the clearing. It was circular, too perfect to be natural. The snow untouched in the center, despite the trees leaning inward as if trying to cover it. And standing at the center was a figure, the same kind as the one I'd seen the night before. But this one was taller, more defined, its skin a shade of grey so pale it almost glowed. It stood motionless until I stepped forward, and then it raised one arm slowly, bending at the elbow in a gesture that felt wrong, not human, not mimicry, but something alien, attempting to imitate us without understanding what the motion meant. I raised my rifle, but I couldn't fire. My finger wouldn't move no matter how much I screamed at myself, and the creature opened its slit mouth, and the sound that came out was not a hum this time. It was a scream, but not vocal. It hit inside my skull like 1,000 blades of glass vibrating against bone. I dropped the rifle, stumbled back, eyes watering, blood leaking from my nose, and as I turned to run, I saw more of them between the trees, tall and unmoving, dozens of them watching in absolute silence. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about Lunka. This wasn't just a disappearance. Something in these mountains was waking up, something that had been dormant for centuries, and I had walked straight into its territory. I don't remember how I got back to the car, just the sound of branches scraping against my coat, the feeling of being followed, of being studied. I drove back down the mountain like the devil himself was behind me, and when I reached base, they said I looked like I'd aged a decade in a single day. I told them about Lunka, about the totems, the figures, the humming, and they told me they'd send a larger team up in the morning. But I already knew they wouldn't find anything. And I was right. When they reached the village the next day, it was gone. The homes still stood, but they were empty. Truly empty. No blood, no carvings, no signs of life or death, just frozen silence and snow. And the tree line had moved. The trees were closer than they should have been. Like the forest itself had shifted forward a few feet, and no one believed me except the old man who sat on the edge of town carving strange symbols into wood and whispering in a language no one else spoke. He told me I had been marked now, that I had stepped into a place that did not forget, and that if I ever went back, it would be waiting. For weeks after I came back from Lunka, I couldn't sleep without seeing those pale figures standing in the trees, and even when I did manage to rest, I would wake up with my mouth open in a silent scream and blood running from my ears. I tried to tell myself it was stress, trauma, a hallucination from isolation or oxygen deprivation. But no matter how many times I tried to explain it away, the memories stayed sharp, like broken glass in my thoughts. Worse still, strange things started happening around the station. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things that made the other officers uneasy. Patrol vehicles would stall for no reason. Radios would crackle with distorted voices that didn't match any language we knew. One officer reported seeing lights in the trees during a routine sweep, and when he went to investigate, he found a circle of melted snow in the middle of a pine grove where the air was still warm to the touch. Days later, he disappeared while on night patrol. We found his car parked by the side of the road, engine still running, door wide open, but no footprints in the snow, and not a single trace of him anywhere. Some of the younger officers joked about it, blamed wolves, or said he'd finally cracked from boredom, but the older ones wouldn't laugh. They just got real quiet and avoided the tree line. I started to feel watched again, even when I was deep in town. Far from the mountain roads, the feeling would crawl up my spine like something cold and wet, breathing on the back of my neck. And more than once, I caught glimpses of those same pale figures at the edge of my vision, in reflections, in windows, in puddles and mirrors. Never full on, never clear, just enough to know they were still around, still waiting. One night, the old man who had warned me before came to the station. He looked worse than before, his eyes sunk in his skin like paper. And he gripped my wrist with bony fingers and whispered that they had noticed me now, that my scent had passed through their world, and the forest would not let me go. He pressed a carved piece of wood into my hand. It was rough-shaped like an eye with jagged lines around it, and he told me not to lose it. Not if I wanted to stay in this world. I didn't believe him. Not fully, but I didn't throw it away either. I kept it in my pocket, and after that night the dreams got worse. I started seeing something else in them, something deeper than the pale things, something under the earth. I would dream of standing in the forest as the snow melted away into dark mud and roots that twisted like serpents, and then I'd see it. A black shape, not moving, but pulsing, as if breathing under the soil. Massive and ancient, its form impossible to understand, like my eyes weren't meant to see it. And all around it were the pale ones standing in worship, humming that low, unbearable sound. The last dream I had showed me something else, a name not spoken, but pushed into my thoughts, something guttural and inhuman. A word that felt like it had existed long before humans did something that made my heart thud in terror, and my bones ache just to remember. The next day I woke up with deep scratches along my arms, like I'd been clawing at myself in my sleep. The wood talisman was gone. I searched my room, tore it apart, but it was just gone, like it had never been there. And that night I got a call from dispatch telling me another village had gone silent. This one even deeper in the Carpathians, closer to the old ruins people avoided. And I knew I shouldn't go. I knew this was what they wanted me to do, that it was part of some process, a luring, a pulling. But I also knew that if I didn't go, they would come down for me instead. So I took my rifle flashlight, and this time a camera. I needed proof. Not for them, not for the station, but for myself. Because if I was going mad, I wanted to see it. I wanted to know it was madness and not something real. I drove in silence through the snow-covered roads, every mile pulling me deeper into something I didn't understand. And as I got closer to the village, I saw symbols carved into the trees, strange looping lines and twisted glyphs that seemed to writhe in the light of the headlights. And the deeper I went, the more often I saw them. And worse, I began to hear that humming again, faint at first, then stronger, like it was coming from the very bones of the mountain. And when I finally reached the outskirts of the village, I realized something horrible. There were no roads into the village anymore. The forest had completely overtaken them. Trees where no trees had been before, thick and black and ancient, as if the mountain itself was growing to consume what remained. and in the middle of the road blocking my path stood a figure taller than any I'd seen before, bent and thin and swaying with the humming. And behind it, in the distance, I saw lights begin to flicker, one by one, deep within the forest, glowing dim and red. And I realized they weren't lights. They were eyes, and they were all looking at me. I don't remember turning the engine off, but the car had gone dead the moment those eyes appeared in the trees one by one, like dying stars, bleeding red behind the black curtain of pines. No two of them, the same height, no two, the same shape, and still I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, until my knuckles turned white, watching them blink slowly as if waking from a long sleep. Something primal inside me screamed to reverse, to leave, to never look back, but my body refused to move. It was as if the cold air pouring through the cracked window had frozen my will as much as my flesh. The figure blocking the road did not move. It just stood there, slightly hunched with long arms that hung below its knees. The same pale flesh stretched tight over bones, and no face, no mouth, no nose. Just two black vertical slits where eyes should have been, and as I stared into them, I felt my mind pull back like something inside me knew if I looked too long it would unravel. I finally got the door open and stepped out. The snow was deeper than before, reaching my shins and heavy, like it didn't want me to move. Every step toward the village was a battle against the weight of it, against the low hum now vibrating through the soles of my boots, like a buried engine running under the mountain. The figure turned without sound and walked back toward the trees, vanishing into the darkness between trunks, and I knew it wanted me to follow, and I knew I would, because if I didn't, I wouldn't make it back to the car. I wouldn't make it back at all. I followed through the woods, not through a trail, but through instinct, pulled forward, like a fish on a hook, catching glimpses of the red eyes blinking between branches, never closer, but never gone. I passed things hanging from trees, not the same totems as before, but stranger things, small cages made of bone, filled with feathers, bits of fur, and what looked like teeth, all twitching, like they were still alive. The forest was changing around me. The snow now had streaks of black in it, like ink or oil. The trees looked wrong, their bark swollen in places like skin stretched over tumors, and the deeper I went, the stronger the smell became, like wet meat and rot and metal. The village emerged all at once. No build-up, no path, just a sudden break in the trees. And there it was, a single cluster of wooden homes arranged in a loose circle, with a stone well in the middle, and nothing moved. Not wind, not snow, not even the smoke from a fire that still burned in one of the chimneys. I stepped closer, gun raised, though I knew it wouldn't matter. And the first thing I noticed was that every house had its door open wide, like something had pulled them all outward at once. Inside, there were no people, just marks, symbols carved into the walls, and ceiling looping spirals, and jagged lines that pulsed with a dull red glow, even though no light touched them, and the floor was soaked with something sticky. Not blood, but close to it, thick and dark. And with that same coppery stench, I checked each house one by one, finding nothing human. No bodies, no signs of life. Only those symbols and that sound growing louder with every door I crossed, until I reached the last home at the edge of the village. It was different. No symbols on the walls, just a massive carving in the floor, so deep it had gouged into the foundation, a massive eye with 6 points, radiating outward, and in its center, a hole perfectly round wide enough to drop a body into, and from that hole came a breath. A slow, sucking breath in and out, like the entire mountain was alive and sleeping and beginning to stir. I leaned over the hole, not sure why, and I heard something speak, not in words, but in a language that pressed against my mind, like cold fingers in my brain. It didn't speak like we do. It injected thought directly into me, and I saw things, visions of old forests, before man existed, of creatures crawling beneath roots and stone, waiting for the stars to align, for the world to become soft again, for the doors to open, and the guardians to rise. I saw pale giants walking through trees, their bones glowing under their skin, and smaller creatures like shadows living in the spaces between things. And in the last moment, before I pulled back, I saw myself among them, not as I was, but as something hollow, with black eyes and stretched skin, and I screamed not aloud, but inside, and my own voice didn't echo. And when I turned, the house was gone. The village was gone. I was alone in the woods, surrounded by the red-eyed things that had followed me all the way, their bodies tall and crooked, their mouths hanging open in silent hunger. And the forest was darker than before, thicker, colder, and the snow had stopped, and the wind had died, and the only thing left was the humming louder now, and inside me too, like my heartbeat had changed its rhythm to match theirs, and I understood something, then something final. I hadn't wandered into their world, I had been invited. I couldn't tell how long I stood there surrounded by those things, the red-eyed watchers whose limbs twitched in unnatural angles and whose bodies seemed to breathe without movement. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, or my legs, or the cold. It was like the forest had swallowed, not just my body, but my thoughts too, muffling everything under a thick layer of dread. And when they moved all at once, not toward me, but away deeper into the woods, like they were leading me somewhere or leading something to me. I didn't know what to do, but I followed because I couldn't bear the thought of being left behind in that place. I followed them through corridors of trees that grew tighter and tighter until the branches scraped my shoulders and face like they were feeling for warmth or blood. The humming was louder now, no longer coming from around me, but from beneath my skin, vibrating in my bones, and I could feel it sinking with my heartbeat, with my breath, with my mind. The path twisted downward, the snow thinning as we descended, until the white turned grey and then black, and I realized we were walking over ash, not soil, and the air was no longer cold, but heavy with moisture and heat, and something sour like burning hair. I lost track of time. The only light was the faint red glow pulsing from the eyes of the things that walked ahead, and when they stopped, we were at the mouth of a cave, not a natural one. It was too symmetrical, too tall, too smooth. Its shape reminded me of a gaping mouth, and from inside came a sound. I'll never forget a wet, dragging sound like something massive and heavy was pulling itself slowly through mud. I stepped inside, and the things did not follow. They stood at the edge of the cave and waited, watching their eyes blinking in slow rhythm, like a ritual, like a warning. I don't know why I kept going. Maybe it was madness, or maybe that humming had buried itself so deep inside me that I no longer had a choice. The walls of the cave were damp and pulsing like flesh, and I could hear voices whispering from within the stone. Not in words, but in pain, raw and endless, like the cave itself remembered every scream that had ever echoed inside it. And as I walked, the tunnel widened until I entered a chamber, vast and black, and alive the walls shimmered with something slick, and in the center was a pit, no bottom, just a hole in reality itself, and around it were figures hunched and broken, whispering in voices. Too old for language, their skin was paper thin, stretched over bones and veins, and they turned as one to face me with eyes that were not eyes, just holes where the world leaked in and the humming became deafening. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as images exploded behind my eyes. I saw things I was never meant to see. Cities under the earth made of bone towers, reaching down into the void where things swam through the dark, not with limbs, but with thoughts. I saw the pale ones dancing in circles around pits, like this one, offering pieces of themselves to whatever slept beneath. And I saw something awaken, something that had not moved in eons. Its body, not a shape but a concept. Its eyes not visible, but felt like heat and pressure and gravity. It opened and the world shifted, like fabric pulled too tight, and I realized it wasn't coming. It was already here. It had always been here. This mountain was its body, these woods, its lungs, the caves, its throat. And we were the infection, the ones who had come too close, who had settled too near, who had ignored the old warnings buried in stories and carvings and bones. I tried to stand, but the weight of it pressed me down, and then I saw them again, the pale figures standing around the pit watching. And I knew what they wanted. I was not supposed to leave. I had seen too much. I had touched the thoughts of the thing beneath, and it would not let me go. I don't know how I got out. My next memory was snow under my hands, my boots soaked in blood. That was not mine, and the forest was silent again, empty again. The red eyes gone. The watchers vanished. But I knew they hadn't truly left. They had just pulled back for now, letting me run, letting me spread whatever was now inside me, because something had changed. The cold didn't bite anymore, and the sky looked wrong, too big, too low, like the mountain had grown taller in my absence. And the road I came on no longer existed, replaced by more trees, more snow, more dark. I walked for hours or days. It didn't matter, because when I finally saw lights, they weren't from the town. They were from the outpost. And I collapsed in front of the gate, babbling and bleeding, and they dragged me inside and locked me in a room, and no one would speak to me for 2 days. And when they finally did, they said, the village I had gone to visit didn't exist. No record, no maps, no coordinates, just forest and ice and shadow. And when they reviewed my camera, they found nothing but static. They kept me at the outpost for what felt like weeks, but the days bled together in a haze of silence and flickering lights. No one looked me in the eye. Not the other officers, not the medic, not the commander. They asked no questions and gave no answers. They brought me food that I didn't eat and water that tasted wrong, like minerals from deep underground. And at night, I heard footsteps outside my room, pacing, pausing, breathing, something soft scratching against the door. And when I finally gathered the strength to open it, nothing was there, but a smell lingered. That same damp earth scent mixed with rot and metal. The smell of that cave. I tried to write down what had happened, tried to draw the symbols I had seen. But every time I started, my hands would seize up, and I'd feel blood trickle from my nose or my eyes or my ears, like whatever was inside me didn't want it spoken aloud. And every attempt came out different, the shapes shifting on the paper, even when I wasn't looking, as if the ink was alive, and then the dreams returned. Not dreams exactly, but memories of things I had not lived. Visions of creatures under the world, vast and endless, weaving in and out of reality, singing songs in frequencies that split stone and bone. I saw mountains crack open to reveal cities, older than the stars. I saw forests walking across plains, dragging roots like limbs. And I saw the thing in the pit, waking slowly, opening layer after layer of itself, until there was only thought, only hunger, only heat, and that voice that wasn't a voice whispered again in the center of my skull and told me the truth that the Watchers were only servants, messengers, not creatures, but echoes of a greater will that had been buried in the Carpathians, long before man learned to build fire, a god not of flesh, but of awareness, something that had slept beneath the world, dreaming our existence. And now that I had seen it, I was a fracture, a weak point, a door, and it would use me. Not to enter, but to be remembered, because forgetting was the only thing that had kept it buried. Not prayers, not rituals, not sacrifices, but silence. And now I had broken that silence. Every time I spoke of it, wrote of it, even thought of it, I fed it. I gave it shape. I gave it room to grow, and I could feel it blooming inside me like a second heart. Something wet and black and pulsing. One night I woke to find my window open, though it had no latch, no hinge, and the snow outside was covered in prints, not footsteps, but long dragging trails, like something had crawled up the side of the building and slipped in. While I slept, the talisman the old man had given me was on the floor, broken, split in two, and hollow. And I realized then It had never been to protect me. It had been to bind me a seal, to keep whatever was inside from leaking out. And now it was gone, and I was no longer alone in my body. I saw things move in mirrors behind me, flickers of tall, pale limbs and red eyes, hovering over my shoulders, and in the silence, I could hear others calling from the woods near the outpost. Voices. I recognized voices of the missing officers and villagers, and even the old man, all speaking in unison, calling my name, not with anger, but with need, with devotion, with hunger. I tried to run, but no matter how far I drove, the woods never ended. The roads never connected to anything. I passed the same trees over and over, their trunks carved with new symbols. Ones I hadn't seen before. Ones that looked like maps and keys and mouths. And when I returned to the outpost, exhausted and broken, I found it empty, abandoned. The lights dead, the radio silent, the gates open wide. And I knew then I was the last one, the final witness, the last voice before it could speak for itself. And now I write this, not to warn you, not to beg for help, but because it needs to be told. It compels me to share, to plant the thought in your mind. Because if you're reading this, it's already begun. You're already thinking of it, imagining it, shaping it. And that's what it wants, because thought is its blood memory, its flesh. And every reader, every listener, every frightened soul it touches becomes another eye, another mouth, another road leading back to the pit, under the mountain, where it waits, still humming, still dreaming, still growing. And when it finally opens, when the last dreamers awaken, when the watchers return to lead us into the woods again, it won't need to whisper anymore. It will speak, and the earth will listen.